Hello, and welcome to the Awana Games and Sparkorama Coaches Training. As you progress through this training, we will look at the games played during the Sparkorama and TNT Awana games. We will also review the rules for each game along with some common mistakes and errors. An important aspect of the Awana ministry is teaching good sportsmanship. Whether we win or lose is not important, as putting forth our best effort. Maintaining a friendly attitude at all times demonstrates that Christ can give peace and victory in every circumstance. No coach should destroy a Christian testimony by even one moment's display of poor sportsmanship. Being a winner for the Lord is more important than winning Awana games. We encourage all team coaches to enthusiastically motivate their team. However, you should not mistake enthusiasm for unsportsmanlike outbursts. Officials in all sports make wrong calls, but our officials are trained, devoted, impartial, born-again volunteers who do their best to officiate according to the Awana Games rules. Awana Games affords boys and girls an opportunity to display a charitable spirit under the pressure of competition. Although the games that Sparks and TNT clubbers play are unique, there are some general rules and common mistakes that are good to remember. Teaching your clubbers to know these rules will help improve their games experience. As your clubbers are participating in the games, please make sure that they are always paying attention to where they place their feet. One of the most common mistakes that clubbers make is placing their feet over or past a game boundary line. These lines are determined by each game and are clearly marked on the game floor. Another common mistake that clubbers make is starting in the game too early. Examples of this might include the clubber starting before they receive a baton, or stepping over the line before they receive a beanbag, or before they are tagged. As the games proceed, please ensure that your clubbers are sitting or standing in the proper location as determined by the circle director, and always encourage your clubbers to cheer on fellow teammates. As your clubbers are participating in the games, please make sure that they are aware of the circle pins and to be careful not to knock over these pins. When your clubbers are playing a game that involves a device such as a beanbag or baton, please make sure that they are aware of their team zone. Your clubbers should not let the playing device leave their team zone. We mentioned earlier the importance of good sportsmanship. As you are modeling good sportsmanship for your clubbers, please let them know the importance of not pushing or interfering with other clubbers or teams. Also make sure that your clubbers know that if they have questions concerning the games, to ask their coach and not the line judge. We also know how easy it is to get excited while we're playing the games. But please make sure that your clubbers are focused on the game so they do not skip any players during the game. This is a common error made in some of the relay games. After your team enters the game floor, please make sure that they do not lick or wet their shoes. This could give clubbers an unfair advantage and can make it easier for clubbers to trip during running races. Sparkorama is similar to a TNT Awana Games meet, but yet it's different. It's a day of fun for young children and a day of exciting participation with new friends. As a coach, please remember this is not a day of high-pressured competition. Sparks-aged children are not ready for the keen rivalry of an Awana Games meet. Don't expect or encourage them to compete as fervently as older boys and girls. Sparkies play games for the fun of playing them. Winning can be only one gratifying result of their team effort. Sparkorama should also be a ministry to parents. It is an important opportunity to present clearly the gospel of Jesus Christ. Remind parents not to stress highly competitive attitudes with their children on this special day. A Sparks team consists of a minimum of 10 players and a maximum of 15 players, of which at least 3 players must be boys and 3 players must be girls. Every player must participate in at least 3 games. All Sparks clubbers in the 2nd grade or lower who did not reach their 9th birthday by September 1st prior to the meet may participate. All Sparksorama participants must have passed 10 sections this club year by the day of the meet. Teams may register for only one Sparksorama meet. If you have less than the number of clubbers you need to make a full team, please remember that your clubbers can still participate. Even if you only have one clubber, contact our missionary Jerry Burheim so he can get your clubbers placed on a team. We prefer that every clubber that wants to participate is able to do so. During the Sparky Beanbag In and Out, clubbers line up on their team's circle line and a container is set in the team's small triangle. A beanbag is then given to player number 1, which is the player farthest from the team's starting diagonal. If there is an even number of players, the beanbag will start in the container. At the start signal, player number 1 runs to the container and places the beanbag into the container and returns to the team line and tags player number 2. Player number 2 retrieves the beanbag and brings it back to player number 3. The game continues until all players have participated. The last player with the beanbag in hand runs it to the center for the pin or beanbag. Players may not proceed into the circle before being tagged or given the beanbag. And the winners must retain possession of their beanbag when they grab the center pin or center beanbag. During the Sparky Safari, the first player is positioned at the starting pin. The other 2 runners wait inside the circle within their team zone. The beanbag is placed on the first player's head, and at the start signal, the first player runs around the circle and passes the beanbag to player number 2, who then places the beanbag on their head and runs around the circle. Player number 2 then passes the beanbag to player number 3, who places the beanbag on their head, runs around the circle, around their starting pin, and into the center for the center pin or beanbag. Player number 3 must have the beanbag on their head until they cross the circle line for the approach to the center pin. All players must have the beanbag on their head while moving around the circle. If the bag falls off while the player is running around the circle, the player must not touch the bag with their hands until it hits the floor. The player must then stop and place the bag back on their head before continuing. While moving around the game circle, the player may not touch the bag with their hands. The beanbag must be passed, that is, handed off and not thrown, and placed on the next player's head within the passing zone. After passing the beanbag, players return to the team line. Hairstyles and accessories should not be used to enhance winning. In the balloon battle, one coach from each team will hold a rope stretched from corner to corner, making visible boundaries to help players stay within their triangles. Players stand anywhere within their own playing area. The circle director holds a balloon and stands in the center of the circle. At the start signal, the balloon is tossed into the air. Players bat the balloon with their hands to keep it from touching the floor in their area. When a balloon touches the floor within a team's playing area, that team receives 1 point. There is a 60-second time limit for each heat, and the circle director starts a new heat in the center of the circle. The balloon does not have to go over the rope, and players may not hold the balloon or step out of their area. If a balloon lands outside of playing areas, the circle director or line judge restarts play from the center of the circle until time runs out. During the rabbit hunt, one team, called the Rabbits, stands anywhere within the game circle. The 3 other teams, called the Hunters, position themselves anywhere around the circle. At the start signal, Hunters toss balls trying to hit Rabbits. When hit, Rabbits leave the circle, returning to their team line. Action stops after 30 seconds, at which time Rabbits that are still in the circle are counted. Play is repeated until all teams have had the opportunity to be Rabbits. The team with the most Rabbits left in the circle wins. Rabbits are disqualified if they step outside the circle before being hit. Hunters may not step inside the circle while tossing a ball. During the Sparky Train, players line up behind one another outside their circle line. Using either one or two hands, each player grasps the noodle. At the start signal, while holding on to the noodle, the players run around the game circle. When all 5 players have crossed their starting line, the last player separates from the train and runs into the center for the center pin or beanbag. All players must be holding the noodle while running around the circle. If the players become unattached, the train must stop and all players must grab the noodle before continuing around the circle. During the Sparky Balloon Pop, all team players straddle their team diagonal with their backs towards the center of the circle, as close together as they wish. The last player stands on the 8-foot hash mark. The first player holds the balloon on the back of their head. At the start signal, the balloon is passed through the legs of all of the players until it reaches the last player. When the last player in line has possession of the balloon, they run into their team's inner triangle and places the balloon on the floor, and then sits on the balloon until it breaks. The first player to break their balloon within their triangle wins. It is not necessary that each player touch the balloon. If the balloon breaks before it gets to the last player, a line judge may insert another balloon. The balloon must go through the legs of every player. The balloon must be popped inside the team triangle. For the TNT Awana Games, all clubbers in the 3rd and 4th grade who have not reached their 11th birthday by September 1st prior to the meet may participate. All clubbers in the 5th and 6th grade who did not reach their 13th birthday by September 1st prior to the meet may participate. All Awana Games team members must have passed 10 sections this club year prior to the date of the meet. If you are short players, Sparkies may be substituted for 3rd and 4th graders, and 3rd and 4th graders may be substituted for 5th and 6th graders respectively. The reverse is not allowed. Teams may register for only one Awana Games meet. If you have less than the number of clubbers you need to make a full team, please remember that your clubbers can still participate. Even if you only have one clubber, contact our missionary, Jerry Burheim, so he can get your clubbers placed on a team. We prefer that every clubber that wants to participate is able to do so. In the beanbag relay, one player standing in the game leader box acts as a game leader for this event. During the heat, if you have a girl in the middle, you must have a boy receiving the beanbag first. And if you have a boy in the middle, you must have a girl receiving the beanbag first. The team leader may stand or move anywhere in this box, but must have one foot in this box whenever they are throwing or catching the beanbag. The team leader may lift their foot which is in the box, but will be disqualified if it passes through the imaginary plane extending upwards from the line which form the box. The other players stand with both feet along the circle. These players may not step inside the circle at any time during this event. A strip of tape 4 feet to the right of each circle pin marks an area that must be kept clear for the game leader of the neighboring team when they run into the center. Interference will be called if a neighboring team gets in the way of a game leader running into the center. At the starting signal, the game leader throws the beanbag to the player to their right, which is the furthest from the team's starting diagonal. Player number 1 catches it and throws it back to the game leader, who throws it to player number 2. Play continues until all players on the circle have received the beanbag from the game leader and have returned it. When the game leader receives the beanbag from the last player, they run around their own circle pin and then towards the center, touching their scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins that heat. The game leader must run around the pin without touching another player. The game leader must retain possession of their beanbag to win this event. If players miss or drop the beanbag, it can be retrieved by any of the other players, providing they do not step inside the circle or outside their team zone. However, the bag must be thrown to the game leader by the player who missed or dropped it. A player may lift their foot, but they will be disqualified if it passes through the imaginary plane extending upward from the line. Bags landed inside the circle or within the team zone may be retrieved by the game leader, but they must then step back into their leader box before resuming play. If a team's beanbag goes outside of the team zone, the team will be disqualified. No player should attempt to retrieve a beanbag that has gone into a neighboring team zone. Players must stay in order. No trailers are allowed. In the sprint relay, the first player with the baton starts outside the circle just behind the starting diagonal. The other three players wait inside their circle within their team zone. At the starting signal, the first player goes around the circle and passes the baton to the second player. The baton must be completely passed within the team passing zone, or the team will be disqualified. The second player runs one lap and passes the baton to the third player. The third player runs one lap and then passes the baton to the fourth player. When the players have completed their laps, they must leave to the right, away from the circle. The fourth player runs one lap, runs around their circle pin and towards the center, touching the scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins. The winners must retain possession of their baton when they touch the scoring pin with their hands. Players who knock over a circle pin will be disqualified. Dropped batons may be picked up and play resumed unless the baton has gone outside the game square. Players should continue running even though someone tags or passes them. Sprint relay players may also participate in the sprint race or marathon race, but may not participate in the marathon relay. In the beanbag bonanza, the colored beanbag is placed in the center of each team's center triangle. 5 players line up on their circle line. Player number 1 holds the striped beanbag in their hands. At the starting signal, player number 1, which is the player farthest from the starting diagonal, runs into the team center triangle, switches the striped beanbag for the colored beanbag, and then runs back to the circle line and hands the colored beanbag to player number 2. Player number 2 runs into the team center triangle and switches the colored beanbag back for the striped beanbag, returning to the circle line to hand the striped beanbag to player number 3, who repeats the action. Play continues until player number 5 switches the bags. Player number 5 then hands their bag to player number 1 and play continues for a second round. The second time player number 5 goes in, they do not switch the bags, rather they run towards the center, touching their scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands and has their striped beanbag in their possession wins that heat. No player may step over the circle line until they are handed the bag from the previous player. If a player does step over the line prior to receiving the beanbag, they must return behind the circle line with both feet before entering the center triangle to place down the beanbag. Failure to return behind the circle line disqualifies the team. The beanbag must be placed by hand all the way to the floor. The beanbag should not be dropped or tossed within the triangle. Each time a bag is placed in the triangle, no part of the bag may be outside of the triangle or the team will be disqualified. If the bag or a player enters another team's zone, the team will be disqualified. When a player runs from placing the beanbag in the triangle, they must hand the beanbag just picked up to the next player. Players stand at arm's length apart. No bunching or rotating is allowed. Prior to the start of the three-legged race, behind the team color line, the coach must securely band the right ankle of one player to the left ankle of another. Each pair starts outside the circle behind their starting diagonal. At the starting signal, the two players run as a pair for 2 full laps around the circle. Players complete the race by going around their circle pin and towards the center, touching their scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first team to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins that heat. A team is disqualified for the heat if their pair knocks over a circle pin or if the ankle band comes apart. If any player falls to the floor, the team is not disqualified. Players continue running even though someone tags or passes them. In the sprint race, the player stands outside the circle just behind their starting diagonal. At the starting signal, the team player runs 3 entire laps around the circle and then runs around their circle pin and towards the center, touching the scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins that heat. Players who knock over circle pins are disqualified. Sprint race players may also participate in the sprint relay or marathon relay, but may not participate in the marathon race. In the 4-way tug, 2 players from each team take hold of the rope with their hands at one of the 4 marked points. 4-way tug players may wear gloves for this event only. 1 beanbag is placed on the diagonal line for each team at the 12-foot mark. At the starting signal, all players pull the rope towards the beanbag on their team diagonal line. Players are not permitted inside the rope. Play starts with the rope taut. When the beanbag is moved, it is to be flush with the top of the tape. Temporary loss of the rope during the tug will not disqualify the player, but the player who picks up the beanbag must have one hand securely on the rope at the same time in order to win. To make it easier to reach the beanbag, players, while holding the rope, may use their feet to draw the beanbag closer. While the teams are tugging, judges on the diagonal line, when signaled by the official starter, will move the beanbags 12 inches closer to the center every 15 seconds. If the bag is moved off the mark on the diagonal line during play, it will be placed on the proper mark at each 15-second signal, provided that by doing so, the team is not giving up an earned advantage. The points for each heat will go to the team whose player first grabs the beanbag while still holding the rope. In the game Knock It Down, the player stands outside the circle with the beanbag just behind their starting diagonal. At the starting signal, the player runs around the circle, then to their team zone. Standing behind the circle line, the player tosses the beanbag either over or underhand at the center pin. The first player to knock down the center pin wins that heat. Players retrieve their own beanbag and go back to their own team zone outside the circle and continue play until one player knocks down the center pin. Beanbags going outside of the team zone may be retrieved. If a player steps across their circle line while making their throw, that throw will not count, but the player is not disqualified. There will be a time limit for each heat of 60 seconds. If no one knocks down the center pin within 60 seconds from when the heat begins, time will be called and no points will be scored for that heat. The marathon relay is the same as a sprint relay, except that players run 2 laps rather than 1 before passing the baton to the next player, or before the third player runs around their circle pin and towards the center, touching the scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins. Players who have completed 2 laps should leave to the right away from the circle. The players must retain possession of their baton when finishing to be awarded points for this event. Players should continue running even though someone tags or passes them. Marathon relay players may participate in the sprint race or marathon race, but may not participate in the sprint relay. In the marathon race, the player stands outside the circle just behind their starting diagonal. At the starting signal, the player runs around the game circle. If the player is a boy, he runs 6 laps. If the player is a girl, she runs 5 laps. The player then runs around their circle pin and towards the center, touching their scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins that heat. Players who knock over a circle pin are disqualified. Marathon race players may participate in the sprint relay or marathon relay, but may not participate in the sprint race. Players may not block other players during this or any other game. In the balloon relay, the diagonal line is divided into 3 zones. 5 players straddling the diagonal line up and face the center. The first player, who is wearing a wristband, stands in zone 1, and the 5th player stands in zone 3. The first player holds the balloon with both hands and with the balloon touching the back of their neck while they're waiting for the starting signal. At the starting signal, the balloon is passed through the legs of the first 4 players to the 5th player, who is in zone 3. On completion of the pass from zone 1, players 1 through 4 may begin to assume the positions required for the next cycle. When the player in zone 3 receives the balloon, they run to their new position in zone 1. When the player who started in zone 1, which is the player who has the wristband, has worked their way back to zone 3 and has received the balloon, they run towards the center, touching the scoring pin with their hands to finish. The first player to touch, tip, or knock down their scoring pin with their hands wins that heat. It is not necessary for each player to touch the balloon. Only players in zones 1 and 3 will be disqualified for crossing floor markings only when they are in possession of the balloon. The player must maintain possession of an unbroken balloon to receive points for this heat. If a balloon breaks, the team is disqualified for that heat. Thank you for participating in this training. This training was an overview of the Sparks and the TNT games. Please refer to the official rules for more detailed information regarding these games. You can find the rule books for Sparks and TNT games on your Awana Missionaries website, which is located at www.idahooregonawana.org.